Okay. So we can just start whenever. I thought what would be kind of fun is, I have to say I love your book so far. Haven't gotten through
Thank
it.
you.
It really helps me to understand a lot from what I've read. So I'd really love to talk to you about that and really get into that because I just think it just oh, I'm sorry. This is Nicole.
Paul,
Hi.
I kind of figured that by the name on
Yeah.
there. You said. Nice to meet
I'm
you in
sorry.
person.
Nice to meet you.
And so I'll just kind of, if you're okay, it's just kind of a free flowing conversation. But I really love your book. I think it gives just such a history of everything. And I'm learning so much I just can't even believe what I'm reading, to be honest with you. I'm like on the edge of my seat. I wish I could have finished it. So I really want to talk about that and the history and kind of why you got into what you did, which is fascinating and amazing, and kind of go from there. Are you okay with anything?
Anything is fine. Yep, that's great. And I don't know if here's my book.
Yep.
I don't know if this podcast is just going to be audio or video, but if it's video, here's the book for anybody listening.
Yeah.
I'm not so good at PR, so when I get a moment to plug, I'll plug. Yeah, this book is great. You can get it on Amazon. This is actually, I don't know if it says this in the book, but the cover is a picture of my great grandmother. This is Mildred, my link to Mildred. And then the little girl in the picture is my mother. So this is her grandmother. Um,
I can't remember I can't remember if you said
I
that
don't,
maybe in the
I
very
don't think I did
beginning.
actually.
Okay.
I really don't think I ever said that, which is kind of cool too. I don't know. I like maybe that I didn't say that, and it's just there.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Dr. B and Nicole, and I'm Farah. So I just wanted to welcome everybody to our podcast. We have a special guest, and I'm super excited to welcome you and just to talk to you about your book and about MVC in general. It has transformed and is transforming Sonnenberg Consultants. And I just would really love to get into the history of you, Dr. B, and who are you? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Wow, that's a funny question to start out with. Who am I? I don't know who
Who
I
are
am
you?
anymore. I really don't. I'm a 59-year-old woman, just turned, live in Tallahassee, Florida. Um, I have two daughters who are adults at this point and a husband of many, many years. And I have always I never understood war as a kid. I remember like being in my room and just being puzzled by that. Still to this day, like just
Yep.
puzzled by um like how could so you're telling me war is this thing that people kill other people and they don't even know them, like just seems weird to me. And I just, as I'm growing up, I remember thinking like that song of let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. And I remember I'm never very religious, probably more spiritually bent than actually religiously bent. But when I would go to church and hear that song, I used to have some despair around it because I used to think, like, wow, I want this so much in my heart. Like, I could feel how deeply I want that in my heart to, like, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. And then I would think about, like, my life and, like, how it wasn't that way in my life. And I want that so badly. And if I want that so badly and I'm not attaining it, like, wow, we're screwed. That was kind
Yeah.
of my thinking. So I think I've always been a seeker for how to live more in alignment with that. And yeah, probably out of anything I've ever explored, nonviolent communication to me was the ticket for that. It was the ticket for being able to live in alignment with the peace that I want so badly in my heart. And it doesn't mean that I get it perfectly, that I get it perfect all the time, because I don't. but I have this anchor that can bring me back into alignment with that. That's the best I can say of who I am. I probably should say like some of the other things that are like, I have a doctorate in instructional systems design, and this comes out in the book that I used to do program evaluation for 25 years, going into like social systems and educational systems in particular. And I was the person that would like gather data on all these different programs and see how well they're functioning and what the outcomes are and all of that. And what was always so glaring to me for so many years was like the social emotional component. No one's talking about the social emotional component. And like, I just know that if kids are dealing with stuff like that, then they're not teachable. Like now we really know that. Like now the brain
Yeah.
research is really showing like, yeah, there's no way somebody can take in information if they're not having their basic needs for safety met, right? Um, so I always knew that and was very drawn to that, and came across NVC more in a private sense, but then it really informed me about like, I was just always so drawn to it. Like, this is the answer. And I took a huge leap of faith in my program evaluation work probably 15 years or so ago now, after doing it for 25 years, and went into the world of restorative practices, restorative justice. I just took a leap and decided I wanted to do this. And luckily my husband was very just he was just open, yeah, follow what you want. And I ended up running a restorative justice program here in Tallahassee for about 10 years. And we got national recognition because of the work that we were doing, combining restorative practices along with nonviolent communication. I worked with kids ages 13 to 17, most of who were in the legal system and referred to us because they broke the law of some sort. So they were our quote tough kids that I was working with for many years. And we just walked the walk and talked the talk in that program. We lived the NVC process, we modeled it, we taught it. And we had this amazing ability to like just pull kids in. I mean, by the end of my time there, we would have some circles that would be close to 50 in a circle, because I'm not kidding, because what would happen is these kids would come in and they would be so pissed off, about being there because they were ordered to be there. The state attorney or Department of Juvenile Justice ordered them to be there. So they were, very resistant. And by the end, they didn't want to leave ever. And I could never turn a kid away if they wanted to come back and volunteer. So we would end up having many kids returning and new kids coming in. And then we had a whole bunch of volunteers in the community. And yeah, so we just had a lot of success with what we were doing. That program is still running.
Wow. Who's
there's
running
lots-
that program?
The people that were working for me are now running the program. Yeah.
Wow.
So still living on, which is great to know. It survived even through COVID, which was miraculous, I think. And that was pretty much when I had my leaping off point. I don't know if I would have ever have left there if it had not been for COVID. In a way, was a blessing for me, because when you're teaching and living and modeling NVC, especially to kids, what I would call marginalized youth, right? You get to know them. And with NVC, that's the whole point of it, is it's about connection, right? But not BS connection. It's about like really knowing somebody very, very deeply, and not just one way. It was both ways, right? I wouldn't just give empathy to kids. Sometimes they would give empathy to me. Like we were human with each other. So when you know people in that way, there's just so much love, and so much real connection. And I love them so deeply. I don't know if I could have ever untangled myself from being with them. But COVID in that way was a blessing, because it allowed me to just kind of naturally step away and then build what I'm doing today, which is, just have had this vision for a long time that this work is so badly needed everywhere in the world. As I'm trying to grow this business, it's really hard because people are always like, you have to have a little, niche of some sort, right? I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way with this. Like anybody that's a human being walking on this world or this earth could use what I'm doing, really. Like, I'm not just saying that. Like, it's
Right.
applicable for, I think, everyone. So yeah, I've had this dream of scaling it because there's so much conflict, there's so much violence, there's so much trauma, there's so much real disconnection. Like, we don't, I think, this is my thinking, we don't know how to be real with each other. It gets in the way in all of our environments, whether you're in a school environment or a workplace environment or family environments. We don't know how to be real and really hear each other and be in a place of openness to each other. And NVC, I think, gives us the playbook on how to do that.
Well, and thank you for that. I think that your book, so My Link to Mildred, really, I mean, I'm not through it all, but that kind of makes me think about, the Big B method, which is how we met, and how I just Googled, I believe it was just NVC or something along those lines. I was looking for something more concrete or something with just more of a history and just structure. So my question to you, is there anything else like this that's like class-like, and where you sit down and you do weekly assignments and you have your empathy gyms and things like that? Can you explain that a little bit? I mean, it says it in the book how it was kind of born, right? And how it gets structured, but I would love to hear a little bit about that and why it's different, because I definitely think it's different than anything.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. I don't know if there's anything like it. I don't know that there is, but I'm not out there and I haven't tested every NVC course that's out there. And I do want to just say right from the outset, like I pretty much say any NVC course or instruction I've ever had in the past, I've loved. There's so many, this is judgment, but I think so many amazing NVC trainers out there, and everybody has their own way of offering it to the world, so it's worth it, I think, to cast your net wide and get influenced by many different people, because it's not a process, I think, that you ever stop growing in, ever, 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 ever. And everybody will add to a little bit more like opening with it. I think what makes what we're doing a little bit different than anything that I have come, and I struggled with this, because some people will say that NVC is much about like consciousness. It's beyond just languaging. It's really about intentionality and how your mind is thinking, right? So there's a conscious bent to it, which I do believe is true. And as I was developing out the Big B method, which at first I thought you couldn't put it online, I went kicking and screaming, like, oh no, this is about connection. We can't do this online. And it was right around COVID days, right?
Yeah.
And I had some clients were like, well, could you try? And I have one of my best friends from college who was an instructional designer, as am I hired her to help me develop out the curriculum. And she was like, oh, we could put it online, no problem. Like, yes, let's go forward, right? So, we went forward, and she wanted to do it like a typical instructional designer, like outlining what your objectives are, what your learning objectives are, what do you want to see as the outcomes, like that, those kinds of things, which I think is very different than how most people approach NVC, just that unto itself. And then I had somebody else who is kind of like my right arm person. He's one of my closest friends too, but he came to me through my work. He volunteered at the Restorative Justice Program and was very wowed by what we were doing there. He's an astrophysicist. He's a professor at FSU in astrophysics. And when I was building out this process, he said, well, could you make it like measurable? Could you make it so there's accountability piece to this, right? Like where people are leveling up and knowing whether they're attaining the skills or not attaining the skills, and I was like, well, can't really make it measurable like that because it's consciousness. This is where I was going. And then my instructional designer friend was like, "Oh no, we could totally do that. Like that's not. We can make it We can make this performance based. You know, that was basically what he was saying. Do make it performance based. You know." And I went kicking and screaming to that too. Like, "Oh no, we can't make it performance based. It's going to water it down. You know." But lo and behold, we worked on it and we made a level system. And there was a kind of like an embarrassment about it for me because I was thinking, you know, some folks in NVC, when they hear that I have made a level system of NVC, are going to maybe poo-poo. This is all my thinking. I have no idea. It's just some of my own like concerns about it. But now we're about 3 years into it, I'd say. And I feel proud, like people that I know that I see going through our entire system. So the way the system is set up, just quickly, is I offer an intro to NVC, which is in 8 weeks, which you took. That's what you took.
Yep.
It's all online, and the way that it's set up is there's each of the 8 weeks you have an hour of self-paced study, which is a lot of videos of the process and all the objective-based stuff that my friend Denise and I laid out. At one point, honestly, she flew up here. She's from South Florida, and we did a design analysis. And somewhere we probably still have this of like, it was all over my floor, like flow charts of like how things fit together. I mean, literally, like all over my living room floor with these flow charts of like taking this apart and putting it back together. Right? That's the kind of thinking and intentionality that went into it. So that's in the intro. So you get that with the self-paced for about an hour of each of the 8 weeks. And then we have a 75-minute Zoom call for people to come into each of the 8 weeks, which is a live session where you get to start to practice some of the processes that you're hearing about. Also just have a place to ask questions, you know, a place to practice some of the empathy and expression that you're learning in the class. So you go through that for 8 weeks, but you know, I try to be transparent with people that you don't learn NVC, you don't master NVC in 8 weeks. Like, good luck with that. You know, I'm trying to master it over the course of my life, right?
Right.
So, and I often say, when you come into NVC, I don't care what kind of background you are, how smart you are, what kind of degree you have behind your name. I have yet to find anybody who is not unconsciously unskilled. Like you don't even know there's this thing and this way of moving in the world, this way of thinking, right, and interacting. And then after 8 weeks, you're in a worse place. Now most people are what I call consciously unskilled. Now you know, so you're all jazzed about it and excited about it, but then you're also frustrated about it because you can't really do it. You're not doing it yet in your life, you know. So there's this big like chasm between knowing, being able to apply it. And so that's why we developed what's called the Bigby Method Empathy Gym. So the Empathy Gym, it's actually just taking on those live sessions that you get in the 8 weeks. It's continuing on in those live sessions, but now there's a leveling component to it. And so you can come every week. And usually there's what we call a routine workout, but every now and then we throw in what's called intensive courses. And in the intensives, we're looking at very specific skills, like how are you doing with empathy? How are you doing with expressing without judgment? How are you using connecting requests, and do you know what they are, or action requests? So, and you literally get feedback. We have a performance-based instrument that the facilitator will watch you and give you feedback and let you know how you did or didn't do on it. And so that's all built into the level system, as is a journaling component where we're tracking your use or non-use, which is non-use is also helpful, like just reflecting on your interactions. This is how I learned a lot of my application, was after the fact, after something happened, reflecting on what just happened. whether I used it or I didn't use it, right? Like both of those are going to inform me going forward. So we have this journal built into it to allow you to do that, to start with that implementation a little bit more, to push you more into the implementation part of it. So all to say that as people move through this process, what I have found is people that stick with it all the way through really do have the skills and the implementation at the end of it. So, you know, so much for whatever my resistance was. I do think I'm seeing, you know, the outcome that I want is more people like highly skilled and using it. In fact, I would say the majority of people that have come through my system, they're the people now that I am turning around and asking to be facilitators in my system, because I have complete confidence that they really do know how to show up and live it and be it, right? Because that's very, very important. I can't have people facilitating that aren't in integrity
Well,
with.
I've had a few interactions with a couple that have come back. There was one lady that came back that there was a connection made right in the empathy gym of, yeah, I remember you from 9 years ago. And then they all of a sudden started to talk about it, and they started talking about the program, or, you know, the restorative justice program that she was in with what he was in. And I was like, what's happening? Because this was like week 2. So I'm like, what's happening? And then they started to kind of explain. So it's so fascinating, because you just saw that like yearning for like that connection, and like, I'm coming back because I really need to walk through this again. You know, this is what the lady said. So that was fascinating to me. So I know what you're talking about. And
Yeah, I've had some
yeah.
people take my course like 6 or 7 times. No.
Wow. I believe it.
Yeah.
I really do believe it. I mean, we have, how many, Nicole, do we have taking it? 6, 7? Is it that much now?
I think 6 now.
6. Yeah, we
Mhm.
have 6 going through it right now. And just even after a few weeks of, I think there might be on week 3 or 4 now, right? Would you say some of them?
I'm on week 3. So yeah, I think around that time frame. Yeah.
Mhm.
Just to see everybody's, because we kind of have our own empathy gyms like going on, and some different things we're constantly practicing and going back and forth, and to see the effort and the want, the need, it is so cool, you know, because it's just everybody's really thinking and trying to be present and aware. And so it's been really, I don't know, Nicole, what's your thoughts as you're going through it? Like, what's your
Yeah, I think as I like gain awareness around some of these pieces, my initial thing is that it's harder for me to communicate initially, because I'm like for example, something like when I'm apologizing to someone, like, I'm sorry to hear that, or like, I'm sorry you're going through that. Like I'm so like, I'm recognizing how that breaks the connection, because then they're just kind of like, okay, thank you. Like, but that's it. Like, there's no, that's the end of it. And I never realized that before. And now I'm kind of stuck in this place of like, well, what do I say?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And so like the connecting responses are really helpful though, because I know that I can like ask, like, so can I relate to you, or can I give you some advice? You know, like, would that be okay? Or like, and asking that. But yeah, I can see where the more aware you are, the harder it is a little bit. And you do have to like live and breathe this. And it's a lifelong journey to me. So
yeah, I really I'm hearing that. I had my nephew go through it about a year or so ago, and he was sharing a very similar thing. Like, I don't know how to communicate anymore to people. I feel stuck, you know, instead of like being able to go forward. So I definitely think that there's a stage in all of this where that happens. Yeah, because you're having awareness, like you said, that this isn't bringing me to connection. So you're kind of stopping yourself from doing what you typically do, but you don't know how to easily move into what else there is to do in that moment. So you're in a place of being stuck right then. Yeah. Yeah. I wish there was a way that I could leap you over that.
Yeah, I mean, that's been, sorry, my son's, yeah, that's where I'm at right now, is in
Mhm,
this awareness that gets me stuck, because
mhm.
I'm recognizing when connection is lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that too, because I've gone through it. They've watched me, up for lack of better, struggle through it in practice. We're constantly like, just working through it. And so I think that's what I am excited about moving forward, because we're all doing it together. I mean, I've gone through it, but I'm still struggling just as much, because I'm kind of waiting for everybody to get on this in the same area so we can kind of move forward together with that. But it's what I'm loving about it is just everybody's just need for that balance and that clarity and that communication and that safety. Honestly, that emotional safety is a
Mhm,
big piece that I'm seeing from everybody, and we're all kind of wanting. And so it's really brought us together. I don't know, Nicole, how you feel about this, but I definitely feel a shift. We've had a couple of things happen within the company in the last couple of weeks that we've all, I think, bonded and like, came together over, which in the past maybe we wouldn't have. I don't know. It's hard to say. What do you think, Nicole? Do you see that, or how are you?
I see the shift as it relates to reflection and like being in the present moment, like being together and being heard. And you're heard when someone can like reflect back to you and sit with you in those moments. And that's what I felt, especially as we have been going through like a couple conflicts and things most recently. Like that's what I felt, is like these connections. I mean, these people are here and they're with me, and I know that they're with me.
mhm. Yeah. Can I say some things about
Absolutely.
in reaction to what you both have said?
Mhm.
Well, two things is what Nicole just said. When I was working at the restorative justice program and then in school since then, what I noticed was there would be times we would have cycles. We would have the kids for like a 14-week cycle, and then would start over a new cycle with a different group. And inevitably there were patterns of like things that would happen each cycle. And each cycle you could count on at least one or two classes where all hell would break loose, like kids would be fighting with each other, and like not physical. We never had a physical fight, which is miraculous in and of itself, because these
Yeah.
kids came to us because of fighting. Okay. Never physical fighting, but where there would be, tensions around that. And I used to get like really scared in those moments. And what we would do was pretty much what you just said, right? Like we would slow everything down because we were teaching NVC and modeling it. And we would just make sure, okay, you have something to say what you need to say. And then before anybody responds or reacts, we're making sure that somebody reflects and takes needs guesses about what that person just said, and making sure that they have an experience of being heard fully before we move on to the next person maybe has a reaction, and then they can react. And before somebody says something back to them, we're slowing everything down, but making sure that we're applying this process of just making sure everybody is being heard, right? And what I realized after doing that for so many years, and even watching it in school situations, was that oftentimes we never even came to a solution. Like it wasn't like we walked out of there with like, oh, this is the solution of how we're going to deal with this. But it didn't even matter. Like it just being heard seemed to be the solution, right? Being in the process, being present. We didn't necessarily even need a solution, which was very mind boggling, still is actually to me. So I just wanted to, as you were sharing that, I was thinking about those experiences, and like that's really, there is something there about something just being heard. That in and of itself is the solution. Like, and not BS being heard. It has to be like really being heard,
Right.
right? Because you can BS your way through this and somebody will smell it very easily.
Mhm.
The other thing that I just want to bring up for you guys and also for listeners is that I find that most of the work here is in what I call the do-over, right? I don't get it right. 98% of the time, I do not get it right in the moment. Even after having practiced this for a very long time, I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to do it just the way that I always used to, using the same language or thinking in the same way, right? And then the disconnection happens, and I'm having to live with that. And that's where being an empathy gym or having some kind of process in place in an organization, whether it's with me or on your own, where you can work through a process to be able to come back and have awareness. Oh, these were the needs that were alive for me. Maybe these were the needs that was going on for them. Like creating more internal spaciousness so you can step in and say, hey, that didn't go the way I wanted to. I'm really mourning some connection around the whole thing. And I'm wondering if we could just try it all over again, right? And then you step back in and you apply the process. That's where I think most of the connection actually happens, is after, at least for me, after I've screwed it up and now I have to like step back, get myself back into alignment, and then step back in.
Well, that's helpful for me to hear, because I feel like I'm doing all the time. Because again, I think the reflection and what my husband would say is, do you need me to sit so you can work through this with me? Because I'm talking out loud and working through. I mean, we do this all the time, Nicole and I, and let's talk, like, let's work through this, so we just talk about it. And that's kind of how I work, at least, is I got to hear myself and hear the back and forth. And so that is helpful. I mean, Nicole, you're kind of like that too, you think?
Mhm.
Maybe? Yeah. Like,
I do tend to notice after the fact, like, oh, like that was the connection that I lost. Like I feel the loss of it. And then I'm like, okay, like I didn't do right, wrong, or otherwise. I can go back.
Yeah. That's helpful for sure.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, that's why to me the NVC is like, it's this anchor or whatever, life raft that you can hold on to. You're holding on to it. You have fallen out of the boat, but you're still holding on to that, and you can pull it back in. You can pull yourself back in. Like literally, that's how I think it happens, at least for me. Still to this day,
Yeah.
I wish I could say, oh, I get it right most of the time, first time around with someone,
Yeah.
But I can say this, like in my own organization where I think people are very highly skilled in this process, when conflicts do arise, because they will, that's just part of being a human being. Or like with my own daughter and her friends who have learned and known NVC for many, many years, like I've experienced and seen situations where people know this skill so deeply, and they make an intentional moment to sit down and apply it, like literally apply, the listening and using your connecting request and expressing only with observations and feelings and needs, and making sure the other person's like literally going back and forth on what you guys now know as the dance floor that I put out there, right? The back, using that. And I know this is corny, but I sometimes I want there to be like the la like, moment of like,
Play the music.
wow, like look at this, like we're doing it, like you're doing it, like, and it really is. It's akin to a work of art, but a work of art in like relating and communing in peace building. Like it's an art, that's how it strikes me when I observe it, or when I'm lucky enough to be in the process with someone that's, I do believe that you can work the process for sure, even when someone doesn't know it. You will have skills that will help in that moment. But when you have two people that know it and are quite skilled in it and willing to use it in a moment of conflict, it's a beautiful thing, I think.
I think what was really helpful for us too is, you know, I had given you some of the backgrounds and what we were missing in a previous conversation, and to fill in those holes of, yeah, like not everybody does need to have training or even really be aware. It's helpful, of course. That was helpful because we were stuck too, I would say, on what do we do, because they don't know, and how do we do this, and you know, so I think that was really helpful, and that's what I like about your book, to go back, is the history of that, and you know, the mice study that you talk about in there, I think, and I've heard you mention it, but I actually read it, and just how it's passed down through generations just from genetics. Like, can you talk about that? Because that was like, whoa. I mean, I always thought it was behavioral, always. So that is fascinating. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, just that the science is now showing that it doesn't have to be a behavioral thing at all. That somebody that has had trauma, it's in your genes, and
Easy.
so your offspring can have the very same reactions to those kinds of situations, even if they've never had those situations before, because it's in their genes, right? So
Yeah.
that's a very hard thing to overcome, but luckily, what I also think is worth bringing up is that you know, I think most people have the opinion that if you've had trauma, especially deep trauma, like we're screwed for life, but brain research is actually showing the opposite, that we have, you know, the whole neuroplasticity thing where your brain can actually regrow, like, you know, go
Wow.
in different routes. But it requires a lot. This is probably where the behavioral thing comes in, right? It requires
Yep.
a lot of repetition for that to occur. So, you know, how does this all play out? Well, to me, it plays out in that we all need to be highly skilled. I feel proud in the book of how I handled the NVC chapter. I don't know if you've gotten to that chapter yet.
I'm just getting there.
Because what I like about it, and maybe I'm the only one that really likes this, but I felt very, no, I really did. I felt proud of this because a lot of that chapter is mirroring what is in my course. You'll
Okay.
recognize it immediately, right? But the thing
Mhm.
that's not in my course, that's in the book, is how each of these processes is helpful in reversing trauma or the way that our brains are responding, right? So, you know, why is it important to start with empathy first? Or why is it important to express with only observation, feeling, needs, and requests when it comes to trauma and breaking that the trauma response? And or why you know, making the distinction between a thought and a feeling, how that you haven't gotten to that point in the class yet.
I'm not. I'm
Well, I think
yeah.
it's I think you get it in week 4 too in the course. But like why that's revolutionary to me, the whole
Yeah.
differentiation between a thought and a feeling, and how we are very confused with that in our languaging, and how that, so just, I mean, there's a lot to say, but a quick example of this is like somebody that's, you know, trying to express their feelings, and they say, you know, I feel abandoned, you know, I feel abandoned, I feel manipulated, you know, and for people that don't know NVC, they don't realize that those are not feelings, those are thoughts. Those are a thought. You're thinking that you were abandoned. You're thinking that person did something to you that left
Right.
you abandoned, right? That's not a feeling. You might be feeling sad, you might be feeling lonely, but as soon as you say, I feel abandoned, it's actually a judgment disguised as a feeling because you have I feel in front of it. So, what will happen in a moment like that is if that person has had trauma, which most of us have, okay,
Yep.
they're going to hear it as a judgment. They're going to be defensive. They're going to go to their fight, flight, freeze just unconsciously. And they're going to probably lash back, either get defensive, say some things back to you. And then you're like, what the hell? Like, you know, I was just expressing my feelings, because you think you really just expressed your feelings. Well, no, you didn't. You actually just expressed a judgment. you didn't even realize you expressed the judgment. So you didn't keep this safe space because you didn't know any
Right.
better.
Right.
Everyone's doing this unconsciously. Nobody's even having awareness. So I'm like showing how something like that is in alignment with the trauma response that we're seeing everywhere. Like that's what I'm trying to pull out in that chapter, is how the different parts of the NVC process help to really create more safe, truly emotionally safe space, or making sure people are seen, heard, and valued without judgment. Thus, connection happens, and we all know connection is so key to functioning and, you know, to reversing trauma, right? Like that's, but
Yeah.
what does it mean to be connected? I'm breaking it down for us, like literally breaking it down for us. So there's lots to it. And I think in some of my presentations when I give and I talk about the brain and I talk about, like, you know, the excitement that we can actually reverse trauma, but I think it's like all hands on deck.
Yeah.
All hands on deck. Like everybody out there, like all parents, all teachers, all behavior specialists, like all trained people, counselors that are working in these fields, like really need to know the differences that I'm outlining, so
Yeah.
that absolute safe space happens, like intentional safe space, not just like, oh, feel good, of course I want to make safe space, I'm a good person, I'm going to be nice to you. No, there's a lot of intentionality and very specific things that we can put in place. And I think they're connected to the NVC process.
Well, and I mean, I think that that's what reading the book so far. I mean, I'm not through the whole book, but I think the history and just how you describe your family's history and you're going into kind of how that's passed was very, I mean, I always thought it because you can see it being passed just like that's just, but to actually everything that you just said, it just really makes sense. That's in your genes and how it's passed through. So, I mean, I think that was really great for me to read and understand that history of it. I was just looking over my notes because I took lots of notes too. And so you also studied with Marshall Rosenberg, right? I'm fascinated in what was that like I just want to know I know that he's since passed, but what was that like to study with him, and what was he like?
He was just like what you would imagine he was like, and in all the videos. Okay. So I did a 10-day intensive. That's how I studied with him. I wouldn't say I was like a, close student of his, but
Okay.
in nonviolent communication, they offer these IITs, the International Intensive Trainings. I guess that's what IIT stands for. They still offer them.
Oh, okay.
But he used to run them. He used to just be Marshall, right? And then, he has his offspring now that provide some of the IITs all over. And yeah, to become a certified NVC trainer, you have to do many things, one of which is you have to attend an IIT, which is amazing. Definitely do one if you ever have the opportunity to do one. I mean, there's so much connection and learning and just humanity. I guess I've done two, and they were just both so I love them so much. But my first was with Marshall, with my mother there, by the way.
Oh, wow.
And and then
That was a judgment.
well, and if you read the book, you'll understand, like, a lot of the trauma passed down to me was through my mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were very close, but that was not an easy relationship by any means. And she was in a fight with my sister when we were at the IIT together. So she was, and we were sharing a room. She and I were sharing a room, and she was all angry at my sister for around the same kinds of patterns that I think, much of her upset would come out of. And and I was joking, but not really. Like, if you really want to learn NVC, go to an IIT, a 10-day intensive training with your mother.
Wow.
And I was laughing, like, Marshall Rosenberg had nothing on my mother. Like, he could not get through at the time. because they did a lot of very deep, like sometimes they would put someone in the middle of the group and he would be doing this intense empathy with the person, and his wife would do like this, like energetic stuff around. I'm like, nothing was moving my mom, like nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, but back to your question about Marshall, he's just the way. I mean, if you've ever watched any of his videos, have you ever watched any of his videos? There's
I
so much.
haven't watched have you, Nicole?
Yeah. With
Yeah.
the puppets, he does.
Oh yeah, with the puppets. I mean, he would do the puppets during it. He had his guitar. He would sing
Oh.
songs to us. And he was really getting up there when I took his IIT. He was getting definitely closer to the end of his life and his vitality. Um, but yeah, it was very special to be able to have gotten trained with him leading. It was a profound experience to be able to be touched in that way.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I think I just thought that would be cool to touch on, just the history and how it started. Um, so that was cool. I'm trying to think what else I had in here. I mean, I read some of do you write a lot of poetry?
Do I write a lot of poetry?
Yeah, because you have a lot of it, sprinkled in the Bigby method and
Yeah.
your book, and so is that kind of one of your outlets
Oh,
for?
it's 100%, but I don't do it like I don't. This is the way it happens. And in fact, I'm so glad you brought that up because people that have read my book, in the appendix, it's all, well, it's not all of my poetry, but it's a lot of the poems or things that I wrote when I was running the restorative justice program. So with the kids.
Mhm.
And they were never intended for an audience at all. It was always just the way that I would process being present to some very devastating stuff. Like just, I used to be so frustrated when I was working there. I had probably a lot of anger during the time I was working there and frustration um, because I did know those kids so well, like beyond beyond the stereotypes, beyond even any of my own thinking about how they were, who they were, beyond all of that, like just so that was what was so great about running that program is how much we were just being human with each other. It didn't matter how old we were to one another. It didn't matter our skin color. It didn't matter our race, our religion. It really didn't matter. Like that's what everybody it was tangible for all of us. But I worked with so many kids that came from so much poverty. I mean, deep, deep poverty and a lot of racial stuff. And I would know all of that very deeply,
Yeah.
like the stuff they were going through. And it was very different than my privileged reality, honestly, and just trying to wrap my head around all that. So I would just wake up in the morning, and I still do this. Like I have my phone, I'd barely be out of bed. I'd just be thinking about them. And then I would just write this, like it would just pour out of me. That was pretty much how. And my frustration was that I used to think like if everybody I knew, I have so much belief in the goodness of people. I think that if everybody were able to sit in circle with these kids the way I was, or doing empathy, like there would be such an outpouring of like just getting it, right? But it's very hard to get people to do that. So, I was left with knowing them so deeply and not having other people, even people in my life that I was close to, not having a similar experience with them as I was having. So when I wrote the book, I thought, well, the book is all about trauma, right? And those poems were all about the secondary trauma that I was experiencing. It was what my way of processing their trauma. So, and it would be my way of being able to let people sit in circle with me a little bit by putting those poems in the back of the book. They would be able to have a window into the reality, kind of a little bit more than what they were able. So, Yeah.
Well,
So
it
that's
was
there.
interesting. I'm sorry. It was interesting because I was just looking at the one that you have labeled, I think it's Shaniqua,
Mhm,
in the beginning.
mhm,
And I'm reading through it. You have it's like almost 4 pages. And this is what my husband describes. So he works with inner city kids, very
mhm,
similar to what you're describing. He's a DINA student. He runs anger management classes because they have to go through it. Sounds very, I mean, he doesn't have this training, but, and you talk a lot about, or you have talked about power sharing versus power over. And bringing in, for your restorative justice program, and they have power, everybody's power over them, but how do you power share? He doesn't talk in those terms, so to speak, but he uses poetry too, and I've read a lot of his poetry. It sounds very similar to you. He kind of works through it because he's put his entire life since he was 22.
mm,
He'll be 51 next month. And it's just really interesting to see how you do need an outlet, because he talks about it as differently than what you're talking about, but similar. And it's very heavy.
mhm.
And he's like, you look around and you see a teacher, he's in a school, and you see a teacher say some nasty things about whatever student. And he's like, if they only knew,
Mhm.
they only knew that they have not eaten in days, they've been molested, their mom's in a prostitute, they don't even know who their dad is. They have, they're 15 people living in one room. I mean, he's like, how do you get this out there? How do you, exactly what you just said, if I could just show them, it would change their whole perspective. And
And
like, these kids are
so
showing up. We're
true.
getting them to come here. They're
Oh,
talking with me. And he goes, by the end of the day, you're like, you've gotten somewhere, because I would think of it as power sharing. Am I saying that kind of? Yeah. Right.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just hearing without judgment and being
Yep.
there, and he's not trying to coerce them or make them do. He's just showing up and being there, and that's it with no judgment. It sounds like he's
Yep.
just doing that naturally. Yeah. I mean, I am of the opinion, like in those kinds of circumstances, we should stop teaching, period, and we should just be pivoting to doing the NVC thing and having people be heard all day long and learn how to be with one another and communicate. Because it's really, I have thoughts, it's not the teacher's fault, because they've been
Right.
asked, you have to teach this curriculum, and you have to, and if you don't do that, you get punished, you get power over
Yeah.
too by not doing it. So they have a classroom of 30 kids. Well, I can guarantee you the majority of those kids are just like what you just said, your husband, like almost every one of them. That's what's amazing to me, is like,
Yeah.
it's just about every one of them is going through something, and there's no way the teacher can have knowledge of that
Right.
and know and plug in that way. But I can tell you that the ones that end up being like the biggest thorn in their sides, the ones that are the scariest kids or the biggest pain in the ass kids, guarantee, like if they knew NVC and could sit down and do empathy process and have that kind of connection in that way, it would be like, whoa, like such awareness and a different level of connection. And then what happens is, when you have the connection, then you get the cooperation. Like it's backwards in that way. You have to have that connection first, so you have to actually give presence to the things that your husband, thankfully, in a school situation, is giving some presence to. But that's where I'm saying it's all hands on deck. Like we
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
need, like everyone in that school, in my opinion, really needs to first, it gets back to, how we started this conversation. I saw the huge hole in social emotional, and I'm so glad that now there's talk about it,
Yeah.
and there's more awareness about it, but we're still like light years away from where we need to be, honestly, to truly address it. We
Yeah.
still have a huge amount of work, because schools really, in my opinion, need to be shifting to putting the focus on the social emotional learning first and foremost. And then we could shift to everything else. Then the other things will come in easily, right? They'll
Yeah.
be able to digest that stuff much more easily.
Yeah. Nicole, do you have we only have about 5 minutes or so left. Is there anything that you want to ask or questions that you have?
No, I mean, I think it's just, it's a process, and like, I appreciate you coming on and like sharing your background with us, and, what, you've kind of like worked through. I think this is very powerful, and can change a lot of lives. I know it's changed mine in just like the short time that I've been like a part of this process and learning about NVC and what that can do for all the relationships that I have in my own life. And I'm like to the point where like I just want to share it with everyone. And so no, I mean, it's very powerful stuff, and I thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, well, it's been really fun to talk about it and to talk to you and to meet you, to have the name of the face together there, Nicole. Um, I did want to say something, because when you asked, you were talking, I think earlier, Farah, about your husband and the writing and how that's how he processes, I think,
Yeah.
processing. And I think maybe you were also alluding to like everyone needs that, like we need a way to process, like, which by the way, that is also, here's a shameless plug, like that's what I do building out the empathy gym. When we go into schools, we're teaching the process of NVC and the languaging, but we're building a place for the adults to process their stuff. Like that's what has to happen. They need to learn the tools, but they also need a system where they're actually processing all of that stuff. That's how you build the resiliency and the resourcefulness so that they can step back into those classrooms and be present for those kids. Without someone being able to do that for them, they're vacant. They can't do it for others, right? So that's like the professional development that we're doing is it's two-pronged. It's giving skills, but it's also providing a system for the processing that is so desperately needed. And so that was one thing I want to say. The other thing was my book itself was a process, because my mom died out of nowhere. Like she literally, we did not see it coming. She was here April 1st, a year ago, year and a half. Can't believe it's been a year and a half since my mom died. But she came to Tallahassee on April 1st and she died on May 5th. And on April 1st, we knew nothing. Like we thought she had just pulled her neck. Like that's how quickly the whole thing happened. And when she was dying, my mom told me to write this book, which I knew I knew I was going to write it. I had this name written on my computer for 25 years. Like I knew I was going to write this book. And then when my mom died, about just a few days after she passed, my body was just waking me up about 4 or 5 in the morning, and I would come here into my office and I would just start writing it, and it poured out of me. Like it was so easy to write it. It took about 2 months and it was done. Wow. It was literally like that's how it happened. I didn't even, but it was early in the morning, because I think it was like a unconscious processing of just my life and my mom's passing and trying to make sense of my mom's passing, and so much of the beauty that I felt around my mom's passing, which people don't ever talk about that in depth, in death. Just trying to wrap my head around all of it. It was my process to make sense, and obviously to have a tribute to my mother and our lives and our family's lives. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to continue reading it, because as I'm reading through it with the history and the genetics and just the passing down, I just think about my history and what I learned in that 8-week class and what we've talked about, because I've had many conversations with my son. I've said this in some of the gyms, that I realized what I'm doing, like why I'm saying it, why I'm reacting, what's triggering me. And it's just interesting from a 14-year-old's mind, what he says to me later, what he picked up from that. And, it's just fascinating. He'll go, he'll say things, again, this is a 14-year-old, but like, I know you probably need safety right now, Mom, and you're just like, wow, just that's how he's processing. Maybe we need to take a break, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how it's back and forth, and how sometimes I just have to stop, like that's, and walk away and wait and what, the things that you talk about and that you process through in MBC. But I think that's really making a connection for me as I'm reading through this too, is just how much I'm learning about myself and how I'm watching that in my child, so it's fascinating. So thank you. I mean, I just really appreciate everything you've done in your work because it's really affecting me, and hopefully I can share that with others and continue in the company, which is what we're trying to do, but it really is something you have to live and breathe to get it. And like you said, I keep thinking that, like, I want people, I really do want to connect and understand, and people can smell bullshit, you really can. Like you're just doing that because you're told to do that, or because you're, I mean, completely, so I just wanted to thank you just personally. I'm excited to keep passing and learning and affecting other lives too, as we move along here. So
Yeah,
thank
well,
you for that.
I have gratitude back to you both because it's exciting to me when I see other people that understand or have a shared reality around the power of this work and why it's so necessary, and see it impacting. It's, there's nothing that's more delightful for me, honestly, than seeing that back. So back at you.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. We're excited to continue, and I'm sure we'll talk soon. And I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.